In 1996, a small town in Ohio was shattered when a 7-year-old girl named Emily Monroe vanished from a public playground in broad daylight. No witnesses, no suspects, just a pink shoe left near the slide. The investigation went cold quickly, no leads, no ransom, no trace. The entire town changed after that. Parents never left their kids alone again. Emily's face stayed on missing posters for years. But everyone quietly gave up hope. Then in 2008, 12 long years later, an unmarked envelope landed on an FBI agent's desk. Inside was a grainy photo, a handwritten note, and a name that had never come up before. Suddenly, the case wasn't just reopened, it exploded. What the FBI found changed everything and led to a hunt more dangerous and horrifying than anyone expected. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The sun had been bright that day. It was April 17th, 1996, and the breeze was warm enough for kids to leave their jackets on the benches. The Monroe family, Mother Karen, Father Daniel, and their daughter Emily, were enjoying the late afternoon at Ridgeway Park. Quiet neighborhood space surrounded by thick trees and just a few blocks from their home. Karen sat on a bench near the swings, flipping through a parenting magazine while Emily ran toward the jungle gym, her ponytail bouncing with each step. She was wearing denim overalls, pink sneakers, and a red t-shirt with a cartoon bear on it. A sweet, ordinary child. Daniel had gone to the vending machine across the lot to grab a soda. It was less than 2 minutes. By the time he came back, Emily was gone. Karen's head snapped up when she heard her husband calling out, "Hey, where's Emily?" She looked toward the jungle gym. Empty. She was right there, Karen said, already standing. They searched the entire park, called out her name, checked the restrooms, the trees, the bushes, even under the picnic tables. Karen's voice cracked into screaming. Daniel dropped the soda can and ran to the nearest house to use a phone. Cell phones weren't common yet, not in 1996. The police arrived in 10 minutes. They brought dogs, flashlights, dozens of officers. The park was shut down and volunteers combed the area until long after dark. Helicopters with spotlights circled above the neighborhood. They found nothing, except her left shoe, small, pink, scuffed on the toe. It lay by the base of the metal slide like it had been forgotten. But they knew better. The FBI was brought in after 48 hours. It was the standard for child abductions with no leads. Agent Thomas Blake was assigned to the case. Mid-30s, clean-cut, with a calm voice that made people feel like someone was in control, even if no one really was. He spoke to both parents individually. Daniel broke down in tears halfway through. Karen stared straight ahead, silent for most of the interview, her eyes hollow. "We were only a few feet away," she kept repeating. Blake's team went to work. They gathered CCTV from nearby gas stations. Nothing. Interviewed every single person who had been at the park that day. A few remembered seeing Emily. No one saw her leave. For the next 3 months, the town of Rosebridge was ground zero for one of the largest missing child investigations in Ohio's history. Roadblocks were set up. Door-to-door interviews continued well into summer. Flyers with Emily's picture were mailed statewide. Still nothing. The only thing remotely suspicious? A white utility van had been reported parked across from the park around 4:30 p.m. A witness said they remembered it because it didn't have a company logo. But no one had a plate. No cameras picked it up. It was just a vague piece of a fading puzzle. By fall, the press had moved on. Other stories took over, and slowly, so did life. Karen stopped attending the community search groups. Daniel returned to work at the auto repair shop. They didn't talk much. Sometimes Karen left the TV on static at night and sat on the floor for hours. Daniel began drinking. Agent Blake stayed in touch monthly, then quarterly. But after a year, the case file sat on a cold case shelf in Cincinnati, and there it stayed for 12 years. Until one rainy morning in 2008, Agent Blake, now older, with streaks of gray near his temples, opened a package left at the FBI field office. No return address. No postmark. Just a padded envelope with his name handwritten across the front in shaky block letters. Inside, a photo, a folded note, and a name. The photo showed a young woman, possibly in her late teens, standing outside what looked like a rundown gas station. Her hair was dark, her frame small. She was looking sideways at someone off camera. But Blake froze when he saw the necklace. It was a tiny silver heart, the same one Emily Monroe had been wearing in every childhood picture. He'd seen it 100 times in the case file. The note was just 4 words. "She's not who you think." And at the bottom, written in the same hand, "Tell Detective Mercer in Rock Falls." Rock Falls was a forgotten town 2 hours away. And the name written below, Ralph Hinton. A name that had never come up in the investigation. By that afternoon, Blake was on the road with 2 other agents. They arrived at Rock Falls by nightfall. The place was a ghost of industry, boarded up businesses, faded signage, roads cracked from neglect. They met with Detective Mercer in a dimly lit station. Mercer was old school, gruff, mustached, and clearly annoyed. "We don't have your girl," he said flatly after reading the note. "We're not accusing anyone," Blake replied. "But this photo, this necklace, the name, we need to check it out." Mercer sighed. Ralph Hinton's bad news. Arrest record going back decades. Did some time for assault in '98. Works odd jobs, hangs around the outskirts of town. Lives in an old trailer near the woods. We've had eyes on him for drugs and illegal hunting. The FBI team geared up, bulletproof vests, sidearms. Backup vehicles. Blake didn't want to risk letting the guy slip through their fingers, especially if there was even a sliver of a chance Emily Monroe was somehow still alive. They drove out at midnight, headlights off once they hit the tree line. The trailer came into view under a sickly yellow porch light. One broken step, a wind chime hanging from the gutter. Blake signaled. "FBI," he shouted. "We need to speak with Ralph Hinton." No answer. The team moved in. A shadow darted behind the curtain. Then bang! A shotgun blast shattered the window. "Gun! He's armed!" someone yelled. Automatic weapons were drawn. The front door burst open as another shot fired from inside. Agents returned fire, ducking behind the vehicle. Blake flanked left, circling around the side with 2 others. Then silence, only the sound of the wind. "Go! Go! Clear it!" Blake shouted. They rushed in. The inside smelled of old smoke and rotting food. A mattress on the floor, beer bottles everywhere, but no sign of Ralph. The back door swung on its hinges. He was gone. And in the chaos they had missed something chilling, taped to the inside of a closet door. Collection of Polaroids, dozens. Of girls, some smiling, some terrified. And one unmistakably Emily Monroe. But the date on that photo, 2003, 7 years after she vanished. Agent Blake stood frozen inside the small trailer, staring at the closet door. The Polaroids were attached with yellowed tape. Some had curled at the edges, some were damaged by heat or time. But they were real, and one of them showed a girl who looked exactly like Emily Monroe at around 14 years old. The date scribbled on the bottom in red ink read, August 11th, 2003. 7 years after she was taken. One of the FBI agents, Ramirez, reached up and gently removed the photo. "Jesus, it's her," he said. "Same nose, same necklace. Same eyes." Blake didn't respond right away. He was already pulling out his phone. "Get forensics here now," he said. "And get this whole place secured. I want every inch of this trailer searched. No excuses." Outside, officers from the Rock Falls Police Department spread out into the woods, forming a perimeter. Bloodhounds were called in. A drone was launched for thermal imaging, but the thick trees made it hard to spot anything from above. Blake walked outside and looked around. The trees were close together, tight and dark, like a wall. It would be easy for someone to disappear in there, especially if they knew the area. "Do we have a direction on where he ran?" he asked one of the officers. "West, toward the riverbank. There's an old rail tunnel that way," the man replied. "Locals say it's abandoned. No one's used it in years." "Send 2 teams that way," Blake said quickly. "Keep your lights low. He's already fired once. We don't want more bloodshed unless necessary." As the teams moved out, Blake stepped back inside the trailer. Agent Ramirez had found something else. A hidden drawer under the sink. Inside was a bundle of notebooks badly water damaged, but one was dry. Blake flipped it open carefully. Every page was filled with names. First names only. Some were crossed out. Some had numbers next to them. And 3 pages in, he found a name written over and over again. Eminencia. Then on the next line, Monroe. Blake ran his hand through his hair. He kept records. This wasn't random. We need to find him and fast, Ramirez said. If she's still alive, she may not be alone, Blake finished grimly. Meanwhile, in the woods, the search teams were moving slowly. Flashlights pointed low, guns raised. The trees creaked in the wind. Leaves crunched under their boots. One team reached the edge of the rail tunnel and waited for the other to catch up. The tunnel was wide but low. Graffiti covered the outer walls. A burnt mattress lay near the entrance. Someone had clearly stayed there before. Sergeant Connors, leading the team, turned to his radio. We've reached the tunnel. No sign of movement yet. Copy that, came Blake's voice. Connors took a breath and motioned forward. They stepped in. The air inside was damp and cold. The tunnel echoed every footstep. Broken glass crunched under boots. Rats scurried along the sides. Deeper inside, the beam of a flashlight caught something, a pile of clothes, half burned. And next to it, a rusty metal cage. Empty. Connors called it in. Back at the trailer, Blake got the update and slammed the notebook shut. He had a holding area, he muttered. He kept them in there. Is that where she was? Ramirez asked. Could be, Blake said. If she was there in 2003, where did she go after? Why that photo now? Why the note? A radio squawked again. Sir, we've got fresh footprints leading north from the tunnel, adult male heavy moving fast. Looks like he's trying to circle back around the road. Blake grabbed his jacket. Get 2 unmarked cars moving. We'll intercept from the highway. The chase was on. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows cut through the foggy backroads of Rock Falls. Blake rode in the passenger seat, radio pressed to his ear. He knows we're close, he said. He's trying to vanish again. They turned off onto a narrow dirt road, headlights still off. The trees opened into an overgrown field. An old shed stood crooked in the middle, its tin roof rusted and half collapsed. There, shouted the driver. Movement behind the shed. Blake flung the door open before the SUV even stopped. Gun drawn, he sprinted through the tall grass. FBI, he shouted, don't move. A man bolted from behind the shed, scruffy beard, filthy jacket, limping slightly. It was Ralph Hinton. He turned and fired blindly with a small pistol. The bullet hit the ground near Blake's feet. The FBI team returned fire, aiming low. A shot clipped Ralph's leg, and he tumbled into the grass. Don't move, Ramirez barked, racing in with cuffs. Blake got there seconds later, panting. Where is she? He demanded. Emily Monroe. You had her. Where is she now? Ralph groaned, blood on his hands. I didn't touch her, he mumbled. Didn't hurt her, I swear. Where is she? Blake repeated, kneeling beside him. Tell me now, or you bleed out in this field. She was taken from me, Ralph said. Kept her safe, but he came. Took her. Who? Blake said, voice sharp. Who took her? Ralph looked away. You'll never find him. Blake stood and signaled the medic. Get him patched up. I want him alive. He talks when he's stable. Back at the field office, hours later, Ralph was patched, cuffed to a chair, and staring at a table. Blake entered the room slowly. You had Emily Monroe for years, he said calmly. We found the photos, the notes. You kept her, but you weren't working alone. Ralph didn't answer. You wrote this, Blake said, placing the note on the table. She's not who you think. What does that mean? Ralph stared at the wall. Blake leaned forward. Is she still alive? Ralph slowly turned his head. His face was pale. She's alive, he whispered, but she doesn't remember. He changed her name, her hair, her life. Blake froze. What's her name now? He asked. Ralph's lips cracked into a faint, bitter smile. I don't know, he said, but I know where you'll find her. The small interrogation room was quiet, almost too quiet. Agent Blake stared at Ralph Hinton as he sat cuffed to the steel table, a bandage wrapped tightly around his leg. The room smelled like antiseptic and stale air. Ralph's face was blank now, drained of blood and emotion. But Blake knew one thing. This man was hiding something deeper than what he'd already confessed. You said you know where we'll find her, Blake repeated firmly. Tell me now. Ralph's eyes flickered up for a second before looking away again. Not me, he said quietly. I'm not the one who took her. I just kept her safe, for a while. Blake leaned forward. Safe? You call a cage in a tunnel safe? You had her locked up like an animal. You took photos, notes. What were you keeping her safe from? Ralph rubbed his wrist against the cuff nervously, then sighed. I wasn't the first. I wasn't the last. The man who gave her to me, he said her name didn't matter. Said she was just a delivery. Delivery for what? Blake asked, his tone tightening. I never knew, Ralph muttered. He never told me. Just said to keep her hidden until further notice. Paid me $5,000 every month like clockwork. Cash. I didn't ask questions. Describe him, Blake snapped. Ralph's brow furrowed. Tall. Bald. Clean clothes. Always smelled like tobacco. Had a fancy car, black Lincoln. No plates. Blake wrote that down. Aim? Only knew him as Mr. Landry. That's what he told me to call him. Blake looked at Ramirez, who was watching from the other side of the glass. He nodded. They were getting somewhere. Blake took a breath. Where's the last place you know she was? Ralph paused for a long time. Then finally he said, There's a house. North end of Sandpiper Ridge, big place. Fenced in, no neighbors close by. That's where he said he'd take her once he didn't need me anymore. When was that? 2006, Ralph said. Last time I saw her, she was 15. Looked scared, didn't recognize me anymore. Give me the address, Ralph nodded slowly. Blake stood up, heart pounding. If you're lying, he warned, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life underground. But Ralph didn't flinch. Check the house, he said. You'll see I'm not lying. 2 hours later, 4 black SUVs rolled quietly through the misty hills of Sandpiper Ridge, heading toward the address Ralph had given them. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a faint orange glow over the thick trees. The air felt heavier, like something was waiting. Do we have confirmation on the owner of the house? Ramirez asked. Blake flipped through the file. Property registered under a fake name. No tax records. Utilities paid in cash through a P.O. box in Florida. So it's clean, Ramirez muttered. Too clean. They stopped about a quarter-mile from the gate and continued on foot. The house was massive, white paint peeling from the sides, windows covered with blackout curtains. A long gravel driveway led to a detached garage. The fence was 6 feet high with barbed wire running across the top. This is not a family home, Blake said quietly. This is a fortress. The team moved in with weapons drawn. FBI, Blake shouted. Open the door. No answer. They moved fast. 2 agents broke through the front with a battering ram while others covered the perimeter. The house smelled of bleach and dust. It was eerily quiet. Rooms were mostly empty. No personal touches, no pictures, no signs of everyday life. Just cold furniture and locked cabinets. In the basement, they found something chilling. A padded room. No windows, no doors. Just a hatch above that opened from the outside. The walls were covered in scratch marks. The floor had an old mattress and a bucket. In one corner, there was a chain still attached to a bolt in the concrete. Blake looked around slowly, rage building in his chest. He kept someone down here, for a long time. Ramirez turned to a door at the far end of the hall. Sir, this one's locked. Breach it, Blake ordered. They forced it open. Inside was a small office, clean and organized. A desk, filing cabinets, and on the desk, a single framed photo, a teenage girl smiling in a school hallway. Dark brown hair, olive skin, blue jacket. It was Emily, older, changed, but unmistakably her. She's been going to school, Ramirez asked, confused. Blake examined the photo. There was a school logo on the shirt. Eastmore High School, he read aloud. It's here in town. Wait, Ramirez said. You're telling me she's been out in public this whole time? Blake nodded slowly. She's been hidden in plain sight. The next morning, Blake and his team visited Eastmore High under the pretense of a security inspection. They met with the principal and quietly asked about a student who matched Emily's appearance. After a brief search, the name came up, Chloe Adams, enrolled in 2006. No prior records before that year. Perfect attendance, excellent grades. A foster father listed as Richard Landry. Blake's pulse quickened. He used the same name. He's bold. The team waited by the front exit as the final bell rang. Students poured out. Laughter, backpacks swinging, sneakers squeaking across the floor. Blake scanned every face. Then he saw her. Same soft features, same eyes, same necklace. She looked happy. Chloe. Blake said, stepping forward. She paused. Yeah. I need to talk to you for a moment. She looked confused. Why? Blake showed his badge. It's about someone from your past. Her face changed. Confusion turned to fear, then denial. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, backing away. But Blake saw it in her eyes. She did know. And she was about to run. "Stop!" he shouted. But Chloe turned and bolted through the crowd, pushing students aside as she ran for the back of the school. "Go! Don't lose her!" Blake yelled. Ramirez and another agent gave chase. The hallway echoed with the sound of pounding footsteps and shouts. Chloe sprinted through a side door and into the parking lot. A security guard tried to grab her, but she slipped past, running toward the track field. "She's heading for the woods," Ramirez called over the radio. Blake sprinted to his SUV and cut the engine on. "We're not losing her again." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Chloe Adams, who the FBI now strongly suspected was actually Emily Monroe, was running fast. Barely 17 years old, dressed in jeans and a school hoodie, she darted across the Eastmore High track field and toward the woods behind the school. "Don't lose her," Blake shouted into the radio, jumping into the SUV as Ramirez and two agents pursued on foot. She was quick, weaving through the trees, her breath sharp and ragged. Her backpack fell off behind her, but she didn't stop to pick it up. She kept going, branches slapping her face, shoes slipping in the wet mud. Blake's SUV cut through the back access road that curved around the school. Tires spun through the dirt as he pulled to a sudden stop at the tree line. He jumped out and ran. The agents pushed through the dense woods, yelling, "FBI! Stop!" But Chloe didn't stop. She kept running, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She didn't know why they were chasing her. She didn't know who these men were. All she knew was that she'd been told never to trust anyone who asked about the past. The woods opened up to a steep slope that led down to a narrow stream. Chloe slipped halfway down, caught herself on a root, and continued scrambling forward. Blake was gaining ground. He could see her ponytail bouncing ahead, her shoulders trembling from exhaustion. Then she tripped. She hit the ground hard, tumbling onto the edge of the water. Mud covered her hands and face. She looked up and saw Blake approaching fast, his gun holstered but his badge out. "Chloe, stop!" he yelled again. "You're not in trouble!" She tried to get up again, but Ramirez had already caught up. He stepped in front of her, gently grabbing her arm. She froze. Blake arrived seconds later, panting. "It's okay," he said, breathing heavily. "We're not here to hurt you, I promise." Chloe stared at him with wide, confused eyes. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. "We know that," Blake replied, kneeling. "We believe your name isn't really Chloe Adams. We believe your name is Emily Monroe." Her face twisted in confusion. No, it's not," she whispered. "You disappeared when you were 7, he said gently. "From Ridgeway Park, April 17th, 1996. Your parents have been looking for you ever since." "I don't remember," she whispered again. "I don't remember anything before this life." Blake saw her hands trembling. "Come with us," he said softly. "Let's talk. Just talk." Back at the local field office, Chloe sat in a quiet room, wrapped in a gray blanket. Her knees were pulled to her chest. She looked like a scared child again. Blake sat across from her, his voice calm. "We just want answers, Chloe, or Emily. Whatever name feels real to you." She shook her head. "My dad will be angry." "Richard Landry." She flinched. "He's not your real father," Blake said. Chloe looked away. "I always felt off," she admitted. "Like something wasn't right, but I didn't ask. He said I was his little girl, and that's all that mattered." Blake leaned forward. "Do you remember anything from before him?" "Before you were with Richard?" She was quiet for a long time. Then finally she nodded slowly. "There was a room. No windows. I think I was there for a long time. Someone used to bring me food. A man. Not Richard. Someone else. I called him Uncle." "That was Ralph Hinton," Blake confirmed. "You were kept in a basement for nearly a decade. You were taken from your real family. You were only 7 years old." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of that. We believe Richard Landry changed your name, changed your school, moved you around until he settled here. He wanted you hidden, but not locked away. He got cocky." Chloe wiped her eyes. "Is he going to kill me?" Blake shook his head firmly. He won't get close to you, I promise. At that moment, Ramirez entered with new intel. We've got a hit. Surveillance camera caught Landry's vehicle at a gas station 30 minutes ago. He was alone. Where? Blake asked. About 15 miles west, on Route 14. Blake stood instantly. Gear up. Let's bring him in. Landry's black Lincoln pulled into a small motel off a desolate stretch of highway. He didn't look like a man on the run. He walked calmly to the front desk, paid in cash, and took a room key. Room 7. He hadn't noticed the unmarked van parked across the road. Inside, FBI agents were already watching. Blake sat behind the wheel of the surveillance vehicle, eyes focused on the motel. Wait until he's inside, he instructed. We go in clean and fast. At exactly 6:47 p.m., Landry entered room 7. 10 minutes later, Blake gave the signal. 3 agents moved in from the rear while Blake, Ramirez, and 2 others approached from the front. FBI, Ramirez shouted. Come out with your hands up. A long pause, then bang, a shot fired from inside. Down! Blake yelled as everyone dropped. Bullets tore through the wooden door. One agent returned fire, shattering the front window. Blake kicked the door in. Go, go, go! Smoke from gunpowder filled the air. The room was dark, lit only by a buzzing yellow lamp. Landry was on the floor, wounded in the shoulder, but alive, his gun just inches away. Don't move, Ramirez barked, stepping on the weapon. Landry looked up, breathing heavily. Blood soaked through his white shirt. You don't understand, he said through gritted teeth. I saved her. Blake walked forward, fists clenched. You stole her. Landry gave a sick grin. She was better off with me. Blake didn't respond. He let the handcuffs speak for him. Later that night, Blake returned to the field office. Chloe, Emily, was sitting quietly with a warm drink in her hands. She looked up as he entered. Is he gone? She asked. He's in custody, Blake said. And you're safe now. She nodded slowly, still processing everything. What happens to me now? She asked. We'll do a DNA test, he said gently. But we're already 99% sure of who you are. Your parents are still alive. They've never stopped looking. She looked down. What if I don't remember them? They'll understand, he said. They'll just be glad you're alive. Chloe nodded, tears returning. I want to meet them. Blake smiled for the first time in days. You will. But even as the room quieted, a thought stayed in his mind. Ralph Hinton had said something strange. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the last. This wasn't just about Emily. There might be more. The next morning, Agent Blake sat in the quiet corner of the field office, flipping through the case file that had once gone cold. Now it was hotter than ever. What started as a child abduction had turned into something much bigger. Blake couldn't shake Ralph Hinton's words from his head. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the last. If that was true, then Emily Monroe, Chloe Adams, was just one of possibly several children taken and passed around like property. The files, the photos, the hidden room, the clean aliases, this wasn't a crime of impulse. It was organized, planned, controlled. Ramirez entered the room holding a report. DNA test came back, he said. It's her. No doubt about it. Blake nodded slowly. Let the parents know. I want them flown in today. Keep it quiet. They're already on a plane. They'll land in 2 hours. Meanwhile, Emily sat with a social worker, trying to make sense of the whirlwind around her. Her fingers toyed with the silver heart necklace, something she had always worn but never understood the meaning behind. Until now. She stared at herself in a mirror. I don't know how to feel, she whispered. The social worker, a kind woman named Teresa, spoke gently. There's no right or wrong way. This is a lot to take in. Emily nodded. They said my name's not Chloe. That I was taken when I was 7. But I can't even remember their faces. You were just a child. Memories sometimes get buried when things are too painful. I remember the basement, she said after a long pause. The man Ralph. He used to bring me soup. He never talked much, but I could hear other voices. Men, sometimes girls crying. Teresa leaned forward. You think there were others? Emily looked down. I think so. At the airport, Karen and Daniel Monroe stepped off the plane with shaky legs and nervous hearts. 12 years had passed. They had grayed. Wrinkles showed where there used to be none. But the pain in their eyes had never left. Blake met them with a calm voice. She's inside. She's safe. But I need to prepare you. She doesn't remember much. She's scared. She's been through a lot. Karen clutched her husband's hand. Is it really her? Blake nodded. Yes, your daughter is alive. Inside the private room, Emily sat alone when the door creaked open. Her eyes lifted, and for a moment, no one moved. Karen gasped. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. His hands shook. Karen stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. Emily. Emily stood slowly. She looked at them, uncertain. I don't remember, she said. Karen smiled through tears. That's okay. We remember enough for both of us. There was a long silence. Then, as if something clicked deep inside her, Emily stepped forward and let her mother hug her. Karen sobbed into her shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arms around them both. It wasn't a movie-perfect reunion. It was messy, full of silence, confusion, and slow tears. But it was real. Hours later, Blake and Ramirez sat in the war room, surrounded by files and pinned photos. A new whiteboard now showed several pictures. Ralph Hinton, Richard Landry, the house, the trailer, and in the center, Emily Monroe. Blake circled one of the notes from Ralph's hidden notebook. One of the names written in bold letters. J. Coburn. Ramirez pointed at it. You think that's our next lead? It's our only name that wasn't crossed out, Blake replied. Ralph didn't talk about him, which makes me think he's higher up the chain, possibly the one giving the orders. I'll run it through every known registry. Good. And check missing children reports from 1990 to 2005. Let's find out how deep this goes. At night, Landry sat in a holding cell, eyes half closed. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't asked for water. He just sat still. When Blake entered the room, Landry didn't even look up. You've got one chance, Blake said. One chance to talk before we start digging through everything you've ever touched. Landry smirked. You don't know what you've found. Oh, I know exactly what we found, Blake snapped. We found a girl you brainwashed, a house you turned into a prison, and a list that looks a hell of a lot like other victims. Landry finally looked up. It's bigger than me. Then start talking. Landry leaned back and said nothing. Blake slammed a photo onto the table. It was the Polaroid of Emily from 2003. Her eyes haunted, her face thin, her wrist bruised. You did this. You stole a life. Don't pretend you were a protector. Landry's smile faded. He muttered something under his breath. Blake leaned in. What? There's more houses, Landry said softly. More kids, hidden, trained, groomed. You think you ended something? You just kicked the door open. Blake's heart sank. Where? Landry shook his head. Even if I told you, you'd never find them all. Back at the Monroe family's temporary safe house, Emily sat with her mother and father, listening to old home videos. The sound of her childhood laugh echoed from the laptop. Her eyes welled up. It was like seeing someone else, someone she used to be. Karen held her hand. You were fearless back then. Emily gave a faint smile. I want to be that girl again. Daniel spoke for the first time in a while. You already are. But even as she sat in the warmth of her real family, a shadow lingered in her thoughts. The other voices she heard in that basement. The crying. The names she wasn't allowed to say. She looked at her mother. There are others, she said. I know there are. Agent Blake sat in the dark conference room, staring at a corkboard filled with maps, photos, and red strings connecting timelines. The further they dug, the uglier the truth became. Children had vanished from playgrounds, schoolyards, even their front yards. Most had gone cold. No suspects. No bodies. No answers until now. Across from him, Ramirez reviewed printouts. 5 missing kids, he said. All between ages 6 and 9. All vanished between 1995 and 2006. All within 4 states. No connection except one. Blake leaned forward. Let me guess. J. Coburn. Ramirez nodded. Jacob Coburn. At registered landlord for 2 of the homes we found linked to Ralph Hinton. Paid property taxes through a shell company in Kansas. Run a background check. Already did. The ID is fake. The man doesn't exist, but someone's been paying those bills for years. Blake stood up and paced. Landry said we'd never find them all. What if he's right? Ramirez looked up. So we don't find them all. We just find the next one. Blake paused. Let's start with the Kansas property. Send a drone. I want eyes on it by morning. At the same time, in a small safe house on the other side of town, Emily Monroe sat by the window, staring out at the quiet night. Her parents were asleep in the next room. The FBI had insisted on keeping agents nearby just in case. The house was secure, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her. She thought of the names she'd seen in Ralph's notebooks. There was one name she remembered clearly. Lila, a girl with short hair and freckles who used to hum songs in the dark. Emily didn't know where she went. One day Lila was just gone. She turned to the agent stationed near the hallway. "Can I help?" she asked. He looked confused. "Help with what?" "Find the others." By sunrise, Blake and Ramirez had landed in Kansas, not far from a small farming town where the second Coburn-owned property was located. The house sat on 10 acres of dry land, surrounded by rusted fences and dead corn stalks. There were no neighbors in sight. No power lines, no driveway, just isolation. "We're going in quiet," Blake said. "No sirens, no noise. If anyone's inside, I want them taken alive." They approached the house with their guns drawn. The paint was peeling. One window was boarded shut. A padlock hung from the front gate, already rusted through. Ramirez cut it with bolt cutters. The gate squeaked open. Inside, the house smelled like mildew and chemicals. Furniture was covered in dust, but signs of recent activity stood out. An ashtray full of cigarettes, a fresh can of soda on the counter, a pile of blankets in the corner. "Someone's been here recently," Ramirez said. They cleared the rooms, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Empty. Then Blake found the door to the basement. It was padlocked too. "Get it open," he said. The lock snapped. The door creaked open. Stairs led into darkness. The air felt colder. Thicker. Blake's flashlight beam cut through the shadows. At the bottom was a hallway with several small doors. All were shut tight. Blake opened the first one. Empty. The second, more blankets, a broken toy, a single shoe. Then the third door. He froze. Inside sat a boy, thin, pale, no older than 10. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. "Hey," Blake said gently, lowering his weapon. "My name is Blake. I'm here to help you." The boy blinked once, then whispered, "He's coming back." Ramirez stepped in behind him. "We've got to get him out now." Blake nodded. "Radio for medics. And call child services." They moved fast, carefully lifting the boy from the floor. He didn't resist. He didn't ask questions. He just clung to Blake's jacket like he was afraid to breathe. As they exited the house, a black truck pulled into the distant edge of the field. Blake narrowed his eyes. "Contact?" Ramirez asked. The truck paused, then reversed quickly. "Go, go, go!" Blake shouted. They rushed the boy to the SUV and peeled out. Ramirez radioed the state police. "Suspect vehicle fleeing northbound on Route 87, black pickup, no plates." Blake glanced in the mirror at the boy, now asleep in the back seat. "He's lucky," he said. "He didn't end up like the others." Later that night, the boy, whose name was Evan, finally began to talk. He told the child services counselor that he'd been taken from his backyard in Missouri almost a year ago. A man with a badge told him he was in trouble, then shoved him into a car. He never saw his parents again. He remembered being locked in rooms, being told to stay quiet. Sometimes food came. Sometimes it didn't. And once, just once, he heard someone say, "Coburn." Back at FBI headquarters, Blake put together a list of all Coburn-connected properties. There were 6 more. Meanwhile, at the Federal Detention Center, Richard Landry sat alone in an interview room. When Blake entered, Landry gave a smirk. "Found one, didn't you?" he asked. Blake didn't smile. "There are more," Landry continued. "You'll need names. I've got them." Blake raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want in return?" "Protection," Landry said simply. "From Coburn. He'll kill me if he finds out I talked." "You're already in a maximum security prison." Landry leaned in. "You don't get it. He's not just a man, he's a system. He has people in places you don't even know to look." "Then give me something real," Blake said. Landry tapped his fingers on the table. "There's a storage unit," he whispered. "Unit 58B, Riverway Storage, Tennessee. Coburn keeps records there, photos, tapes, files." Blake wrote it down. "But if you go there," Landry added, "go armed." That same night, Blake received a text message from Ramirez. It was a grainy photo of an old driver's license with the name Jacob Coburn. It looked real, but it wasn't. It was a mask. Just like everything else in this case. And Blake knew they weren't chasing just one man anymore. They were chasing an entire network. The next morning, Agent Blake stood in front of Riverway Storage in rural Tennessee. The air was hot and still, the kind of silence that made your skin itch. He adjusted his bulletproof vest, eyes fixed on Unit 58B, the storage locker Richard Landry claimed held everything. 3 FBI SUVs were parked nearby. Ramirez stepped beside him, holding a crowbar. "You sure we shouldn't wait for backup?" he asked. Blake shook his head. "If Coburn knows we're coming, he'll have someone clean it out before they arrive. We go in now." They approached the unit slowly. The lock was old but intact. Blake nodded, and Ramirez broke it clean with one sharp twist. The metal door creaked loudly as it rolled upward. Inside was darkness. They flicked on flashlights. The unit was packed wall to wall with boxes, shelves, metal cabinets, and worst of all, a black filing cabinet chained shut at the back. "Search fast," Blake ordered. "We don't know how long we have." They moved quickly. Most of the boxes held ordinary junk, old electronics, papers, tools. But one shelf held a set of thick binders marked only with numbers. Number 3, number 5, number 8. Blake pulled one down. Inside were pages of typed notes, dates, descriptions, names, photos of children. Some had red X across their pages. Some didn't. "These are logs," he muttered. "Targets, kids." Ramirez opened another binder. "This one has surveillance photos. Playgrounds, schools, even bus stops." Blake's hands trembled. He yanked a manila folder from the back. Inside were Polaroids of the girl they'd just rescued, Evan's photo, along with 5 others. "This is their hit list." He grabbed the chain on the black filing cabinet and yanked hard. It didn't budge. "Ramirez, get the bolt cutter." Suddenly, Blake's radio crackled. "Unit 3 to command." Black van just pulled into the lot. 2 unidentified men, no uniforms. Armed, Blake froze. They found us. He and Ramirez backed out of the unit as 2 dark figures stepped out of the van across the lot, both holding rifles. "Get down," Blake shouted. Gunfire erupted, bullets hitting metal and concrete. Sparks flew as rounds ricocheted off the SUV doors. Agents returned fire, taking cover behind tires and concrete blocks. Ramirez fired 2 shots and ducked. "They're trained." One of the gunmen tried flanking the unit, but an agent clipped him in the leg. He went down with a scream. The second man, seeing they were outnumbered, turned and ran toward the woods behind the facility. "Ramirez with me!" Blake yelled, chasing him full speed. The suspect sprinted through tall grass, dodging trees and broken fences. Blake's legs burned, but he pushed harder. The man reached a chain-link fence and began to climb, but Blake pulled his taser and fired. The prongs hit. The man jerked violently and fell hard onto the dirt. Ramirez cuffed him. Back at the storage unit, the injured shooter was bleeding but alive. Inside his pocket, agents found a burner phone with only one number saved: JC. Back at the Nashville field office, the phone was still charging on Blake's desk when it vibrated. Unknown caller Blake hesitated, then answered. A deep, calm voice spoke. "You're reaching too far, Agent Blake." Blake said nothing. The voice continued. "You think you're a hero, but you don't understand what you're unraveling." "Who is this?" "You already know." Blake's jaw clenched. "Coburn." There was a pause. "This isn't over." "You've just touched the edge." The line went dead. Blake stared at the phone in silence. Every hair on his neck stood up. Later that night, Blake sat across from the captured shooter. The man's name was Ellis Dorr, mid-30s, former private security contractor. No formal ties to Coburn, no bank records, no direct communication, no paper trail. "Who paid you?" Blake asked. Ellis stared at the table. "I've seen those kids," he finally said. "They're moved like freight. I didn't know names. Just numbers. Just drop-off points." "And Coburn?" Blake pressed. Ellis looked up. "He's not the boss. He's the system." "What does that mean?" "He builds trust. Pays people off. Judges, cops, politicians. That's how they stayed hidden this long." Ramirez entered with a folder. "We got a match from the thumbprints we pulled off the filing cabinet in the storage unit." Blake opened it and froze. The fingerprint belonged to Detective John Mellis, a local Tennessee officer who had been working missing child cases for 15 years. One of their own. The next day, Blake and Ramirez met with Internal Affairs. John Mellis had access to case files, tips, and internal searches. He'd even submitted reports on the Emily Monroe case years ago, all while working just miles from Coburn's storage unit. We think Mellis is more than just involved, Blake said. He may have been feeding the operation for over a decade. Internal Affairs agreed. Within hours, a sting operation was planned. Mellis was expected at his usual diner for lunch at 12:15 p.m. sharp. Blake sat in an unmarked car across the street, watching as the detective entered with his badge still pinned proudly to his shirt. Ramirez waited inside, seated at the bar. At 12:18, Mellis picked up his sandwich. At 12:19, Ramirez stood and whispered into his mic. Moving now. They approached together. Detective Mellis, Blake said calmly. FBI, we need you to come with us. Mellis looked up, startled. What's going on? We're investigating a connection between you and a federal storage unit found in your district. Mellis raised an eyebrow. Storage unit? I don't know what you're talking about. You will, Blake said. Let's go. Outside, Mellis started to sweat. This is a mistake. I've worked with the FBI for years. Blake didn't respond. He opened the car door. But the moment Mellis saw the cuffs, his face changed. He panicked. He turned, elbowed Ramirez hard, and made a run for it across the sidewalk. Stop! Blake yelled. Mellis reached for his waistband. Ramirez fired one shot. Mellis collapsed. A crowd screamed as agents secured the area. Paramedics were called, but it was too late. Blake knelt beside the dying man. You worked for them, he asked. Mellis coughed blood, looked up, and gave one final broken smile. They owned everything. Then he died. That night, Blake sat at his desk staring at a whiteboard full of names, photos, and questions. Emily was safe, but the war was just beginning. And Jacob Coburn was still out there, somewhere. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. 1 week later. A storm had rolled into the city, washing the sidewalks and turning alleyways into streams. Inside the FBI's Nashville office, Agent Blake stood with a fresh case file in his hands marked Operation Hollow Nest. This wasn't just a kidnapping case anymore. It was a full-blown federal takedown. 4 children recovered, 2 men dead, 1 officer exposed. But Coburn, the man pulling all the strings, was still missing. Ramirez entered the room with a grim look. We've got something. Blake looked up quickly. Talk to me. An anonymous tip just came in. Claims Coburn is hiding in Missouri. Name used Jared Connors. Lives outside St. Charles under heavy surveillance. Rents a property through another shell company. Coordinates. Ramirez handed over a printout. Already mapped. Surveillance team is watching now. They've seen movement, 2 vehicles, tinted windows, and a young girl taken inside last night. Blake's expression hardened. If he's in there, we end this tonight. By nightfall, a full FBI tactical unit surrounded a large farmhouse tucked behind a row of trees in the Missouri countryside. The structure looked abandoned from a distance, but binoculars revealed otherwise. Lights glowed behind blackout curtains. Security cameras were rigged to every corner. 3 floors, Ramirez noted. Front entrance, back service door, basement window. Possible underground space. Blake adjusted his earpiece. We go in quiet, but if they fire, we return. No mistakes, there's a child inside. He looked at the agents one by one. Stay sharp, stay human. Then he nodded. Move. The team split. Blake, Ramirez, and 2 others took the back. Another 4 approached the front. The air was thick with humidity and nerves. At the signal, Blake kicked open the rear door. They entered a kitchen, empty but still warm from cooking. A pot of soup simmered on the stove. It felt lived in, used. They cleared the rooms fast. Living room empty. Office empty. Then, upstairs, someone shouted through the radio. Gunfire echoed. Blake sprinted up the staircase 2 steps at a time. Ramirez followed close behind. At the top, 2 agents crouched behind a hallway wall. Shots came from the master bedroom. Blake signaled. Flashbang. 1 agent pulled the pin. Thud bang! The hallway exploded in light and sound. Then silence. They stormed the room. A man stood inside, mid-50s, pale, tall, thin build, holding a rifle blinking rapidly from the stun grenade. Blake didn't hesitate. Drop it, he shouted. The man turned slowly. You're too late. Ramirez shot the gun from his hands. It clattered to the floor. Blake tackled him hard and cuffed his wrists. Jacob Coburn, he said through gritted teeth. You're under arrest. The man didn't fight. He just smiled. "I warned you," he whispered. Downstairs, they found the girl in a locked guest room. About 8 years OLD. No injuries. She didn't say a word, just held tightly to a pink stuffed bear. Ramirez gently picked her up and carried her to the medics outside. "She's okay," he told Blake, but Blake didn't feel okay. Coburn was silent during the entire ride to the field office. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't say a word. Only when placed in the cold gray interview room did he finally look up. "You think this ends with me?" he asked. Blake sat across from him. "You're the head of it." Coburn chuckled softly. "No, I'm just the organizer. I create the system. But the hunger, that comes from people like you. Doctors, teachers, even lawmen." Blake stayed calm. "We've taken your files. Your logs, your photos, everyone in them will go down." Coburn shrugged. "You'll never reach them all. You're going to prison." Coburn leaned forward. "I've been in darker places." Blake narrowed his eyes. "Then you can rot there." He stood and left. Outside, Emily Monroe sat in the hallway, watching it all unfold. She'd asked to be there, not in the room, but nearby. She needed to see him caught. She needed it to feel real. When Blake stepped out, she looked up. "Was it him?" she asked. "Yes," he said softly. "That was Coburn." Emily swallowed hard. "He's the one who took me?" "No," Blake said carefully. "But he's the one who built the system that made it happen." She looked away. "How many more?" "We don't know yet." She stood. "Then we're not done." 2 days later, a massive FBI press conference was held. More names were released: judges, officers, caseworkers, all arrested based on Coburn's files. Operation Hollow Nest was officially public. Headlines blazed across the country. FBI cracks underground child ring after 12-year mystery. Emily Monroe found alive after vanishing in 1996. Federal agents rescue missing children in multi-state sweep. But inside the bureau, Blake wasn't celebrating. He knew they had more work ahead. The Coburn files were thick. More children, more locations. Some dead, some maybe still alive. And buried inside folder number 11 was a name he hadn't expected to see again. Lila M. Emily's voice echoed in his head. "I used to hear her singing in the dark." Blake picked up the folder and opened it slowly. A photo slid out. A girl, maybe 9 years old. Freckles, short hair. Missing since 2002. Blake clenched his jaw. The operation wasn't over. It was just expanding. 2 weeks had passed since Coburn's arrest. The FBI had raided 7 more properties across states using the evidence collected from the storage unit. 11 children had been found. 4 of them had been missing for over a decade. Some were too young to even remember their real names. Others remembered too much, but Blake hadn't forgotten one name: Lila M. He flipped through the thin case file that now sat in front of him. Lila Martin. Reported missing in 2002 from Knoxville, Tennessee. Last seen walking home from school. Her backpack was found in a dumpster 2 blocks from her house. No suspects. Case went cold until Emily Monroe said her name. Until Blake found her photo in Coburn's folders. He knew the girl had survived at least for a while after her disappearance. Emily remembered hearing her hum at night. But the file had no confirmation of her rescue or her death, which meant she was still out there. Or worse, recently gone. Blake and Ramirez drove 6 hours through back roads into Alabama, toward a lead uncovered during an interview with one of the agents who worked for Coburn. The man had mentioned a small farmhouse off-grid deep in the woods where long-term children were kept. "Sometimes the ones they couldn't sell," he had said coldly. That lead gave them a set of coordinates. It wasn't on any GPS, just rough directions on a wrinkled map. "Is this even real?" Ramirez asked as they bounced down a narrow dirt trail surrounded by trees. Blake gripped the steering wheel. "We're about to find out." The cabin appeared out of nowhere. A 1-story wooden structure with cracked windows and moss-covered walls. It looked deserted, but the mailbox had fresh footprints around it. Someone had been checking it. They parked far off and approached quietly, guns ready. Blake signaled with his hand. "Clear left." "Move slow." He stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly under his weight. Then a small sound from inside. "Cough." Blake raised a fist and waited for backup. Ramirez came around the other side and nodded. "Someone's in there." Blake kicked open the door. Inside, the cabin was dim, musty, and quiet. A table sat in the center of the room. Stacks of canned food lined the walls. A bed with thin sheets was pushed into a corner, and sitting on that bed was a young woman. Thin, pale, maybe 18 or 19. She looked up, startled, holding a small book in her lap. "I'm Agent Blake," he said carefully. "Are you Lila Martin?" The girl stared at him, then slowly nodded. Back at headquarters, Lila sat with a social worker and an FBI therapist. She barely spoke for the first hour. Then suddenly she asked for Emily. When the two saw each other, it was like time bent. Emily ran to her. "You're alive," she whispered. Lila gave a tearful smile. "You remembered me." They held each other tightly. Two girls once imprisoned in the same place, now free on the other side. Blake watched from the window, his jaw tight. There were few moments like this in his line of work, but this was one of them. Later that night, he entered the interview room where Coburn sat shackled to the table. "We found Lila," Blake said flatly. Coburn didn't blink. "She was one of the quiet ones. You kept her alive for 16 years. Coburn leaned back. "I don't keep them. I manage them." Blake stepped forward. "You're going to spend the rest of your life in a concrete box, and you'll watch the news every day as we dismantle everything you built." Coburn smirked. "You think this ends with me?" "I think this ends because of you," Blake snapped. He stood tall and walked out. The next morning, the Monroe family stood on the steps of the courthouse. Karen and Daniel held their daughter close as news cameras flashed. Emily Monroe had been missing for 12 years. Now she was home, and her name had become a symbol of something far bigger. Thanks to her, dozens of children were rescued. Thanks to her, Coburn's network was collapsing. Blake stepped aside and looked up at the sky. The weight on his shoulders hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. For once he'd seen something rare. Justice. Weeks passed. Emily started therapy. Lila moved into a safe rehabilitation home. The other rescued children began their slow journey toward recovery. And the FBI continued its work. Dozens of arrests followed: judges, bankers, property managers, all tied to Coburn's organization. Blake and Ramirez were invited to lead a national task force focused on uncovering hidden trafficking rings. But the part that mattered most, Emily. She never went back to being the little girl who vanished from the playground in 1996. But she became something stronger. At age 20, she began speaking publicly. Not just about her story, but about the ones who were never found, the ones who didn't make it back. She didn't cry during interviews. She stood tall. And every time a new rescue happened, she asked for one thing: to be the first to tell the child, "You're safe now." Because she remembered what it felt like to hear those words for the first time. And she never forgot who she used to be, just a little girl, playing at the edge of the playground, until the world went silent, but not anymore. Not ever again. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, to strengthen our community, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.